Good morning and welcome to the beautiful campus of Kentucky State University, a place we affectionately call the Hill. And welcome to the Convening, Together We Can. I am so excited about the convening today. I'm excited because first of all, it's happening on our campus. And I'm excited because we have this much star power in one place. And when you have this much star power, kinetic energy and synergy will be the outcome. I am excited because I am hopeful for what the results of this convening can do for boys and girls in education across the Commonwealth. It's reminiscent of what I remember in the 1990s when everything that we knew about education was ruled unconstitutional with a court case and the eventual passage of the Kentucky Educational Reform Act, and we had to reinvent education. What a time that was. It was a wonderful time to be in education in Kentucky. The focus was on equity and access to quality curriculum, quality instruction, supported by quality measurement and assessment. We started to close achievement gaps. We added more minority children to gifted programs. We produced more teachers, principals, and superintendents of color. We were the envy of educators across America. We had visitors from every state in this nation and many foreign countries coming to see what was going on right here in Kentucky. Then we left Kentucky for a while to take some jobs in some other places, and we come back, and it appears that for some reason, we may have lost focus, and from the data it appears that we may have retrenched a little bit. So this convening is absolutely necessary so that we can have a major redo, a reset, a collective, let's get it right again. So that's why we're here. Our children are waiting on us. Our children are dependent on us. We need to ensure that regardless of your last name, what language you speak, whether you live in rural areas or in urban centers, you have access to quality education and equitable chances of success, supported by assessment and not overwhelmed by it. Just like Hillel, the first century Jewish scholar, said, if not you, then who? If not now, when? Are you ready? I bring to the stage the director of the Atwood Institute for Race, Education, and the Democratic Ideal, Dr. Crystal DeGregory. Thank you.
Good morning and welcome again to the Hill of Frankfort. Our panelists for today's convening are Dr. Aaron Thompson, a nationally regarded leader in higher education who focuses on policy, student success, and organizational leadership and design. Named president of Kentucky's Council of Post-Secondary Education in October 2018, Thompson served in a variety of leadership roles at Eastern Kentucky University, including as Associate Vice President for Academic Affairs, prior to coming to the Council in 2009. In addition to his service to the Council, Thompson also notably served as interim president for Kentucky State University before returning to the Council in the summer of 2017. As a highly sought-after national speaker, Thompson has presented more than 800 workshops, produced more than 30 publications and research, and authored or co-authored more than 7 books. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the president of Kentucky's Council of Post-Secondary Education, Dr. Aaron Thompson. Our second panelist is Mr. Derrick Ramsey. With decades of experience working in Kentucky's higher education system, Secretary Derrick Ramsey began his career as a community relations officer at the University of Kentucky before becoming athletic director at Kentucky State University. Most recently, Ramsey served as the Secretary of Labor Cabinet under Governor Matt Bevin. Ramsey also served as Deputy Secretary of Commerce under former Governor Ernie Fletcher, where he managed a $50 million budget and oversaw human resources for the agency. As Labor Secretary, Ramsey emphasized workplace safety education and helped to streamline and modernize the state's litigation management system for workers' claims, as well as revived Kentucky's registered apprenticeship program to better recruit and train the next generation of workers. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Secretary of Kentucky's Education and Workforce Development Cabinet, Mr. Derrick Ramsey. Our third panelist is Dr. Wayne Lewis. Dr. Lewis was the interim Kentucky Commissioner of Education when the State Board of Education decided to make him its permanent commissioner in October 2018. Up until that time, Lewis had been a faculty member in the Department of Educational Leadership Studies at the University of Kentucky, earning tenure and promotion to the rank of associate professor in 2015. He most recently served as the Executive Director of Educational Policy and Programs with the Kentucky Cabinet for Education and Workforce Development. With more than 15 years of experience in education, Lewis's resume includes experience in public school districts, post-secondary institutions, and in state government. He has worked as a classroom teacher, teacher educator, post-secondary faculty member, and program administrator in the undergraduate and graduate levels, and as an executive administrator in state government. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Commissioner of Education of the Kentucky Department of Education, Dr. Wayne Lewis. Our fourth panelist is Dr. M. Christopher Brown II, prolific scholar, author, editor of 16 other books and monographs, and author and co-author of more than 100 journal articles, book chapters, and publications related to education and to society. Kentucky State University's 18th president is regarded as an international scholar, the recipient of numerous awards, honors, and service commendations, and having lectured and or presented research in various countries on 6 of 7 continents. Brown was named professor and dean of the College of Education at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, before being appointed a university professor, executive vice president, and provost at the historic Fisk University. He also served as the 18th president of Alcorn State University, and then as executive vice president and provost of the Southern University and A.M. College System in Louisiana before his 2017 appointment as the president of Kentucky State. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the 18th president of the illustrious Kentucky State University, Dr. M. Christopher Brown II. And our moderator for the morning, the provocateur, if you will, is Miss Renee Shaw. Shaw is the managing producer of KET's public affairs programs, Kentucky Tonight, and Connections with Renee Shaw. She serves as a contributing host for several other of KET's public affairs series, including Health 360 and Education Matters. A native of Portland, Tennessee, Shaw was awarded both baccalaureate and master's degrees from Western Kentucky University in 1994 and 1996, respectively. a two-time Ohio Valley Region Emmy Award nominee. Shaw has previously received numerous honors for her reporting and her hosting, including the 2015 Green Dot Award for media coverage in sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and human trafficking. She was also the recipient of the 2014 Anthony Lewis Media Award presented by the Kentucky Department of Public Advocacy. In 2017, Ms. Shaw was inducted into the Kentucky Civil Rights Hall of Fame and shepherded KET's initiative on the opioid epidemic that received national attention and awards. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome our moderator, KET's very own Miss Renee Shaw.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. DeGregory, for that introduction. Thank you, Dr. Brown, for providing this space for us to have this conversation, to the distinguished panelists, and to all of you here today. Indeed, when you look at this stage, this is history in the making. And let's please give a round of applause for the fact that this is the first time in Kentucky history that we've had educational leaders be of color. Our Secretary of Workforce and Development Cabinet, Derrick Ramsey, our new CPE President, Dr. Thompson, and the Commissioner, Dr. Wayne Lewis. So I am honored to have all of you on this stage at the same time. I've had each of them in my studio on numerous occasions, but to be here in this space certainly is going to be historic in the making, history in the making, and the conversation we're going to have is going to be very enlightening. So I'm looking forward to that. I want to start with something that Dr. Lucian Yates alluded to, and I'll talk to you first, Commissioner Lewis, about the 1989 Rose decision. We know we'll be celebrating the anniversary of that decision in June of this year. And we learned from Dr. Yates, and many of us have heard, that there has been a retreat from some of the principles of the Kentucky Education Reform Act, even perhaps some movement on some measures that passed this past week in the Kentucky General Assembly as it relates to school-based decision-making councils, et cetera. I want to get your perspective on where we are educationally in this state when it comes to three particular populations: African Americans, low income, and those who are English language learners.
Thank you for the question, Renee. It is an honor to be here. So I accepted a faculty position at the University of Kentucky in December 2008 to begin that following fall in 2009. And in doing my homework and trying to understand the landscape of Kentucky education, the history of Kentucky education, I went first to the Rose versus Council for Better Education case and to the Kentucky Education Reform Act. As you've noted, and is noted across the country, there's probably never been a more fundamental transformation of a public education system than what we saw with KERA. In fact, what the state Supreme Court did was essentially abolish the current system of public education in Kentucky and direct the Kentucky General Assembly to establish an entirely new one. I don't believe even to this date that has ever occurred in another place before. And so it's incredible. When we look backward at the progress we have made as a state since KERA, it is impossible to overstate that progress. We have gone from a state that was consistently in the rankings, any metric, any indicator you could think of in terms of public education. We were 47, 48, 49, to the place where by most measures, indicators, rankings, we typically rank in the mid to high 30s in terms of our public education system. That is tremendous progress in the span of just a few short decades when we talk about that type of progress. That came from transformational leadership on the part of the General Assembly in reestablishing what a funding formula would look like. There were fundamental inequities in how we funded public education at that time, where if you were a property wealthy locale or district, the funding that you received was adequate or more than adequate to support your educational needs. But if you were not, you often ended up in a place where there was not enough funding to even sustain even the basic education requirements of a system. Fast forward to today, where the funding system that was put in place at the time of KARA is still in place. We can ensure across Kentucky that there is a base level of funding in every one of our 173 school districts, still with pretty significant inequity. When we look from top to bottom, the funding level per pupil in our property poorest district to our most property wealthy district is pretty significant. We can go from about $6,000 to $7,000 per pupil to about $14,000 per pupil that we spend. There is no doubt in anyone's mind that funding matters. I will continue to advocate as Commissioner of Education for strategic funding increases in strategic areas in public education. One of the things that I believe has been lost in this conversation, however, is that increased funding alone will not come even close to the place where we can address some of the very significant inequities and deficiencies in our system that you alluded to. So the progress we have made has been significant. We're nowhere near the same system. But be very clear, the gaps that exist between the performance across this Commonwealth, between low-income kids and their middle-income and affluent peers, between white kids and kids of color, those gaps, kids with disabilities and kids without disabilities, those gaps are enormous. And in some cases, as was noted by Dr. Yates, we have moved backward. We have either not closed gaps or gaps have gotten even larger. It is very clear that while our strategy, our approach for moving the state forward collectively, as we talk about raising the bar, has had some progress, the approach we are using, we have used, has not been successful with closing gaps between kids of color, white kids, low-income kids, and their non-affluent peers. So yes, I will advocate for increased strategic funding in key areas, but what is even more important, or at least just as important, is a re-examination of how we approach education for kids who are not middle class and who are not white. Because what we're doing now, to say it's not working is putting it lightly.
And we'll come back maybe for more specifics on your ideas about those funding increases. If I can go to you, Secretary Ramsey.
Yes,
it's good to see you, sir.
always.
You've been really involved as the Secretary of Education and Workforce Development. You came from the Labor Cabinet where there was the apprenticeship program, and you have adopted that and inherited that as part of your responsibilities. From your perspective as Secretary, given what Commissioner Lewis has just explained, where do you see the Cabinet being able to help address the achievement gap issues and to provide exposure to a wide, vast array of fields, et cetera, that can get kids, improve their academic performance and also get them on a solid path toward a career?
Thank you very much, Renee, for your question. Good morning, everyone. So interesting here in the Commonwealth. And as you mentioned, we had talked about my involvement with the apprenticeship program, which is something I wholeheartedly believe in. And I believe in that simply because when I had taken this position in 2015, one of the things I told Governor Bevin and of course my executive team was, I want to do something, and we were going to be impact players. And what I meant by that was I was gainfully employed where I was. The folk that were working with me were gainfully employed where they were, but I wanted to do something that would change the Commonwealth of Kentucky. The thing that was interesting to me and jumped out at me was that this whole apprenticeship notion. That being, I believe, and I still believe today, the apprenticeship notion will change the trajectory of learning here in our Commonwealth for a generation, if not two. I firmly believe that. You said, how can you so easily and quickly say that? Well, let's do the numbers. First of all, in our Commonwealth, And what will be happening recently will be that the adult ed will be coming over to the Education Workforce Cabinet. Thank you very much, sir. Here in the Commonwealth, we have 347,000 people that do not have a GED nor high school diploma. We also have 5,000 to 6,000 soldiers per year coming out of Fort Campbell, Fort Knox. We also have 16,000 to 18,000 people, our brothers and sisters that have been incarcerated, that are coming back home. There's another group, people that have disabilities. So once you put all these numbers together, you're looking at possibly 500,000 to 600,000 people, if not more. At present today, this morning, currently here in the Commonwealth, we have 117,000 open jobs. As we move forward in the next 5 years, that number could be as high as 350,000 to 400,000. Go out another 5 years, 2028, 2029, that number could be as high as 700,000 by some accounts. And so when you start to look at these numbers, in particular those that do not have any formal education, we have to get them trained up. As a matter of fact, here in the Commonwealth today, 40% of the people, eligible people, people that are healthy, are not in the workforce, and nor are they looking for work in the workforce. And so once you put these kinds of numbers together, there's a gigantic demand. I look forward to working with my colleague, Commissioner Lewis. I look forward to working with President Thompson also, because we collectively are going to change the way things and the way business is done here in the Commonwealth. As we look forward, I was just in England back in the spring. And one of the models that they're looking at is something that I would love to see us adopt here in the Commonwealth. The country of England decided 10 years ago they want to be an international player again. And so one of the things that I encountered as labor secretary, as I moved around the Commonwealth and I would talk to business owners, the one thing that I constantly heard was, as they got young people that came from our universities, it was taking a year to a year and a half before they were getting a return on their investment. For a big business, that's fine. Smaller business, mid-sized businesses, they cannot sustain. And so what the country of England is doing is they're doing this. One, they're graduating young people in 3 years. Second piece is simultaneously on another track, these folk are working, getting some skill sets, so that at the end of this 3-year journey, they now are ready to go. And so that's something I think that our universities, I know I've talked to some of the different university presidents about this issue, and they're looking at things a lot differently now. We, as a Commonwealth, if we're going to compete in the U.S., if we're going to compete nationally, if we're going to compete globally, we have to start looking at things differently. I believe that since we've been in here this morning, things have changed. With the advent of the computer, with the advent of this thing called an airplane or transportation, we can be right here in Frankfort, Kentucky, and be downtown Frankfurt, Germany in 8 hours. That's how fast things are moving. And so with the computer, things are moving at warp speed. And so if we're going to be competitive, if we're going to compete around the world, these are the things that we have to do. This past year, going back to 2017. 2017 was a record year in economic development here in the Commonwealth. Prior year, I think, was 2015, where we brought $5.2 billion of new business to the Commonwealth. 2017, that number was 9.2. And so I say that in that the secret's out. People now know about Kentucky. And the interesting part about that is I want someone in here to lie with me or agree with this lie that I'm about to propose. That being this: can anyone in their wildest imagination go back 5 years, certainly 10 years, and think of a company moving from sunny, beachy, Southern California to Pikeville, Kentucky? Can anybody imagine that? I certainly didn't. Well, it did. A company moved from San Diego to Pikeville, Innerblue, and they're in the battery business. And so my point is that people know about us now. And for those of you that are in business, we all know that everything is driven by the bottom line. And so we here in Kentucky cannot wait for businesses to move here and get ready. We have to be ready now, which is part of my responsibility in Workforce Development Secretary, getting the workforce ready.
Thank you, Secretary Ramsey. Dr. Thompson of CPE, talk to us about your strategic agenda real quickly, not the whole thing, right? And especially when it comes to narrowing those achievement gaps, when it comes to first-generation college students, minority students, and those of low income.
Thank you, Renee, and thanks all. Dr. Ferris, good to see you out there, Chair of the Board of Kentucky State. Dr. Brown, Dr. Yates, I appreciate being back on my campus, I consider. I love this campus. You know, it's good to be back with you, Dr. Brown. You know, let me first of all say that, and I appreciate that our economy is growing. It's as vibrant as we've seen in a long time, but you don't have a healthy and vibrant economy over a sustainable period unless you have a strong higher education system, unless you have a strong education system as a whole. And when we're talking about gaps, we have to understand that unless everybody participates at an equitable level in that system, then it's impossible to have it. The idea that we still have an issue, if you will, if we talk about gaps, opportunity gaps, we have access gaps. You know, students of color and low income are participating in college access about 10 percentage points less. That's huge. We look at college graduation gaps. I mean, that percentage is about 14 points different. Even though we have more people enrolled than we ever had in higher education, kids of color as well as low-income students, we're still not getting them into the economy nearly as fast as we should. So a part of this conversation I think we have to talk about is also what the value of higher education is, or what the value of education is. We still have students and people in our state that really don't understand what that value means. So a part of our agenda is to work with Dr. Lewis, work with Secretary Ramsey, and all of our campuses to focus on how do we set up a pipeline and a pathway that would get a student to a credible credential that they can use to move into the workplace. By the way, I know of no one that goes into higher education in some form without wanting a good job. Right. So how do we help them to do that? So a part of the agenda is talking about access, talking about the perception of affordability, talk about how we get folk lined out with knowing where they want to go do it early. But it's also about if we have, and I would hope you call us the task, if we have these people on stage that's representing in more ways than one, that we have to figure out how to make this alignment in such that we're not blaming each other, but actually depending on each other to make it happen. You know, if we don't, in higher education, build, Dr. Brown, a strong college of education system that would get more of our students of color to be teachers, especially male teachers, by the way, as a whole. If we don't actually have a design system whereby that we're depending on each other to provide mentors and advisors at an early level, if we don't do a better job of helping our counselors in our schools to understand what college and career really means and how to get them there. So a part of the agenda is alignment, but a part of the agenda also is being able to argue the strengthening of post-secondary education, whether it's a one-year certificate to a PhD, that it all matters. So we have to talk about quality in addition to completion. We got to get people through faster, no doubt, but they have to understand that the value they're getting while they're there and what they have once they get it is the important means by which they know they can participate. We've got to get employers engaged on the front end, not just on the back end. They tell us all the time we're not preparing what they want, so what do you want? Let's work together to build it. Right. So it's more than just this idea of talking over each other. It has to be a process by which we're talking with each other formatively to create a continuous model. And the last, there's a lot to this agenda, but I did a handout. But the last piece is about return on investment. Return on investment isn't about whether or not a liberal arts education is less important than a technical education. Return on investment means that it's not just how much money you make when you get the degree, it's whether or not you're able to participate in a long life learning environment that you can use that to continuously build yourself. So the idea that we're going to have to create a new narrative about what it means. And of course, I'm going to be asking our legislature and our governor's office to sponsor us in this, right? But we're going to have to ask each other to do the same. So the idea that we can talk about gaps and we can give the numbers, but what is our agenda to have the inputs that actually move all of us to the goal that we actually set for each other?
A lot that we can drill down on, and we're going to talk about how you all are collaborating with each other, K through 12, and even preschool, because I've heard Dr. Thompson talk about how early childhood performance, it can be an indicator, and a University of Michigan study has shown that Head Start programs have an effect on the outcome of poverty and their performance in higher education. Dr. Brown, you've been patient. And to be host, we come to you last. I'm sorry about that. So as you hear this conversation and what each of these gentlemen do so much impacts you, what do you see as being the pressing issues facing higher ed, particularly K-State, and what would you hope each of these men can help you accomplish?
Yeah, that's a perfect question. One, thank you for hosting. This conversation is in fact the embodiment of our new work at Kentucky State. Our brand identity, people would not allow it. We're still in all things excellence, but I really wanted to rebrand to Kentucky State University an education that works. We just couldn't get the traction on it, but what's really happening is the embodiment of this conversation. I had the privilege of going to graduate school at Penn State, which at that time was a small, rural, regional university in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. President Bryce Jordan came and said that if this university is to have relevance, that it has to be of service to the state. And so everything we began to do at Penn State began to focus on what were the workforce needs of the state and how could we be partners in each area of industry and development to make that happen. And so that's really how this conversation is taking shape. We're very clear that time to degree is important. We're very clear about workforce, but what really was really close to the conversation about neighborhoods, funding, all of that matters, but some of the work that the education faculty have to do with our new curriculum overhaul is deal with the notion of teacher expectation. Mm-hmm. Teacher expectation is the critical link in academic success, and even parent and community expectation to workforce success. So if you are poor, if you are of color, if you are English language learner, it really does not matter if your teacher expects you to perform. Mm-hmm. And sadly, in many classrooms across the nation, and Kentucky is no different, teachers either don't expect, and some may, for whatever reasons, not care. We had a consultant last week who put up a cartoon slide where someone was trying to teach a foreign language. And so the teacher says, oh, I spent the last semester teaching this foreign language. The student was then given the assessment and failed the foreign language assessment horribly. They went to the teacher and said, what happened? I thought you taught them how to speak Spanish. And she said I taught them, I didn't say they learned it. Mm-hmm. So the notion of expectation, that students are supposed to perform, that they are supposed to be gainfully employed, and that they'll contribute to the workforce. The last piece, teacher expectation takes root very early, and those performances matter. It's not often discussed, but the decision to fund education or to fund prisons is based on reading and math scores at the 4th grade level. At the 4th grade, we can predict what the likely lifestyle is going to be. And so if we can be a part of shaping this work of making sure we have good quality teachers across the Commonwealth, a part of the work CREED is supposed to do, and make sure that the expectations are strong, we'll be able to contribute to promoting people who are able to join the workforce and pay taxes that then funnel back into neighborhood tax reform and quality schools and workforce for the Commonwealth.
So let's talk about the collaborations that you all are currently doing and are venturing into. Dr. Lewis, if you could talk to us about how you're working with the Secretary on Education and Workforce and also with Dr. Thompson and CPE.
So the critical area for me to move directly from where Dr. Brown left off is teachers. There is no doubt, either in the research literature or in our good common sense, that the most critical school level factor and determinant in a kid's academic success, it's the school level one, is having a high quality and effective classroom teacher.
That's right.
There's absolutely no substitute. We could sit here all day and talk about all the other things we're doing in education to increase technology, innovative curriculum programs. The teacher, bar none, nothing comes close to having that teacher. So to that end, this is an area where all of us, every single one of us, have a critical stake. So we have the responsibility, the collective we, and I'm including all of us in the room, of ensuring that every kid in this Commonwealth has access to a high quality and effective teacher.
That's right.
That, I believe, is the centermost educational equity issue of our time.
Can I interrupt you for just a moment for applause, but also to get to the critical point of teacher pay? So some would say if you want highly experienced teachers in the classroom, do not turn over for less experienced teachers in the classroom who don't have cultural competency, then pay those teachers with the experience and with the cultural competency to stay in those low performing schools.
Let me add a caveat there. I don't disagree with anything you're saying, Renee. The research does not say, however, that just having the most experienced teachers means that those teachers are necessarily the most effective teachers.
That's right.
So the equity issue is whether or not each and every kid in this Commonwealth has access to a high quality and effective teacher. And that high quality and effective teacher can be one with 4 years of experience or one with 30. In that same respect, you can have a teacher that I would not want my kid in her classroom with 4 years of experience or with 30. That's a critical collaboration point for us, for Dr. Brown, as he's continuing to build on what they're doing in their School of Education, ensuring that as people exit Kentucky State University and go into school districts across the Commonwealth, that they are ready. We don't expect them to have the experience and the expertise of a master teacher, but we are sending people out of colleges of education into classrooms in the fall with the responsibility of educating young people. Now, with support, right? School districts, Kentucky Department of Education, we're going to do everything we can to support them. But day one, they have to be ready for young people to walk into their classrooms. And we know from both national research and state level research that it tends to be lower income kids and kids of color who tend to have less access to high quality and effective teachers.
Yeah.
We have to shift that paradigm.
Dr. Brown.
And I just want to co-sign that check because teacher pay, there's a curve. At a certain point, you can pay, but you don't get the return. What that high quality teacher has is the expectation that the student can learn and perform. There are a number of alternative route to licensure programs, which traditional prep programs don't like us to talk about, but like Teach for America, who takes students in short terms and send them into low-performing, high-poverty, racially diverse classrooms with the expectation that those students should be able to perform, and they're able to generate the same result. Last piece, and certainly I was an elementary ed major. everyone wants to get paid for their work. But there are other forms of pay and compensation that states like New Jersey and California have found work equally well as salary. And those are loan forgiveness programs, as well as compensation rates, what we call retention pay in hard-to-staff schools. So you get almost similar rates of return in teacher retention if you allow teachers to work off student loans in schools as you would giving them that compensation and direct pay.
So to you, Dr. Thompson, when we talk about teaching teachers to teach, how does Kentucky stand up in the way they are preparing future educators to be in those classrooms?
I think it's a great question. I want to build off what they said and look at the rounding out of the rest of the research. What we know that really closes gaps are high expectations, but also high rigorous work,
That's true.
and also high input. So you can have high expectations and high rigor and not have the inputs that a teacher will need, and you won't move the dial very much. So teachers matter both in and out of the classroom, the research shows, how they deal with that child. This is also in college, to believe it or not. So the idea of what do we need to do to move forward in higher education to work with Dr. Lewis and everyone? Well, we need to create an education system, preparatory system, that would allow our teachers to get in the classroom early, their freshman year, to figure out if they're suitable. We can know their dispositions at that time. We need to actually teach them what we call cultural competence. That's merely having them to understand that every student that comes to them are coming to them with a different kind of need, thus needing a different input, and we call that equity, right? We need to focus on an equity-mindedness of people that we choose to go into the system. We need representative bodies that we get into a pipeline to get them into the system. So we do know that pay matters when it comes to longevity of a good teacher. That's what we know. The idea that we're losing a lot of teachers because of pay to go in different areas. I have a daughter who's a teacher. She went not for pay, but to do stuff, and she was a high-performing student in college and in high school. The idea, though, that when we look at what are those opportunities for teachers to stay in longer, the very effective teachers, we're going to have to figure out how to measure that, first of all. Well, we talk about that.
Is it just by standardization of tests and results of that?
It has to be more authentic. And this is where I think we all can have a better conversation about how to get there. We also are going to have to look at the inputs. What are those inputs that we can measure formatively if a teacher is staying on track? We also know, by the way, good teachers that's highly effective, as much as pay, especially teachers of color, also want leadership opportunities.
Right.
How do we provide that? So the idea that we've had this we've known this. I mean, research, we talk about this all the time. So how do we design a process? And how do we get our partners, like in the General Assembly and other folk, to help us to think about that? How do we design our teacher education programs, Dr. Brown and others, to say that our focus is to serve all students, no matter how many teachers we get out there? How do we know that they're effective, and how can we measure it? The other thing, too, is that this becomes a process of professional development as well as teacher preparation. And I think we have to develop more of our institutions of higher learning to focus on how to be top-notch professional development leaders to help our teachers and teacher leaders in our schools to get them those things, high rigor, high expectations, high input processes that they can use.
Secretary Ramsey.
I think what I'd like to add to this thing is when I talked earlier about the whole apprenticeship notion, one of the things, going back, going back to my labor days there, the big thing that I ran into, Renee, was that when I would go to these schools, when I would talk to these teachers, when I would talk to these counselors, talk to the principals, it was almost as if we were opposition. Because again, when people look at success, what they look at success is as a person that's gone through 4 years of college, have gotten their degrees, and then they got their big cheesy smile. That's what success looks like. Well, I beg to differ. And again, with this whole apprenticeship notion, and my original point where I was going with this is I'm so pleased that I have support from K-12, that they know that we're not opposition, we're one team. This is just another way of learning. But also when we talk about this, the average apprentice around the country makes $60,000, and that's with no debt. And one of the things, having spent 16 years on college campuses around the country, the thing that I am adamantly against is college debt. You know, when you look at where we are as a Commonwealth, where we are as a country, the debt that these kids are running up, one, and the fact, too, that they're at the age of 27, 28 years of age and still in the basements of their parents' home. Something's wrong with that picture. Something's wrong with it. And so, hence, that's where I get to work with President Thompson, you know, with the Kentucky Ready Scholarship. For those of you that are not aware of it, in the audience here, my predecessor there, Secretary Heiner, started this program, Kentucky Scholar. And what that paid for was 32 credits. And how it works is if you exhaust out any other potential loans, and then that comes into fill. Well, when I took over back in this past May, we got that up to 60 credits. And so what that does now is that get our folks halfway home to a bachelor's degree without this debt that they're running up. And so as we look into the workplace, in years to come, folks are going to have at least an associate's degree to be competitive in the workplace. Hence, that's how we got this up to 60 credits. So again, we're looking forward to the Commonwealth, but it's not going to work if we three aren't working together.
Right. So
that's how we advance this thing.
Excuse me, sir. So 62% of the jobs in 2030 will require some level of post-secondary education. Is that correct? But post-secondary education isn't just defined by four-year institutions. Dr. Thompson just talked with me recently on a show that just aired this past weekend about the stackable credentials and degrees. Some are concerned that if Kentucky is so focused on workforce development and people being able to do highly skilled jobs, that you're somewhat disincentivizing what Dr. Thompson is talking about, which is the value of education beyond just job placement, right? And that somehow that is communicating that the value of an education isn't worth going in debt to get an advanced degree, a terminal degree, because all of that pays off in some way. So how do you strike that balance between wanting a highly skilled workforce to fill those $100 and something thousand jobs that you talked about, but also not diminishing the value of education for the pursuit of knowledge?
Not diminishing in any way, Renee. But again, let's look at it here. Here in the Commonwealth, 60% of our young people graduate from high school each year. And that number is between 50 and 60,000 per year. Of that 60% that goes on to a college or a university does not graduate. 20% of that 60% graduate. And so that's what I'm talking about in particular when a person goes for a year, they go for a semester, a year and a half, well, this debt doesn't go away. And I'm not in any way, stretch, shape, or form saying that I'm anti-bachelor's degree, or master's degree, or terminal degree. But we have to look at the reality of what our students are doing and be fair to them. Because what we're doing, we're pushing, you need to go to college, you need to go to college. Well, everybody doesn't want to go to college. And everybody doesn't want to go to college right out of high school. And the thing about this, with this Kentucky Scholars, you can be 50 years old, you can be 61 years old. So there's no time limit. But the point that I'm saying is that there are other alternatives, there are other options, and I'm just saying, look at it.
Right.
Because again, as we get out in 15, 20 years, we're talking about at least an associate's degree. We didn't say at least a bachelor's degree.
I want to just quickly just add a note to what the Secretary is saying. He's absolutely right. I think folks that want to set up this what I call false dichotomy between going to four-year institution or going to pursue a two-year degree or a certificate. Renee, we need reality check here in Kentucky. Let's be honest about what's happening. So yes, we have a 90% high school graduation rate in Kentucky. We are doing extraordinarily well in terms of exiting kids from our secondary system. We are not doing nearly as well as we ought to be with sending kids into post-secondary education, which what the secretary said. And even more troubling is when we use our longitudinal data system to track the success of kids as they exit our public education system, we see numbers that are frightening. In the Kentucky public high school graduating class of 2010, after 7 years' time, by 2017, 70% of that class had not earned a certificate, a diploma, a 2-year degree, or a 4-year degree. Absolutely nothing. At a time when, as you've noted, in this post-recession era, 80 to 90% of the jobs being created require some post-secondary credential. Those young people are left out in the cold. So any argument that we're having about 2-year degrees versus 4-year degrees is ridiculous, because our kids are exiting high school, going into post-secondary education, the ones that go, and the vast majority exiting with nothing. There's plenty of room and plenty of opportunities for kids. We have to get kids prepared for what those opportunities are, help them to make good decisions, help them to know, whether they should be pursuing a degree at UK, at U of L, at Yale, at BCTC, at K-State, an apprenticeship program, and then support them as they go through it. But this fight about 4-year versus 2-year degree when 70% of our kids have nothing, that's ridiculous and a waste of time.
Dr. Brown.
Just 2 points on this. One, and it goes back to what Provost Yates said, I think there are 2 pieces and opportunities we should focus on. One is overcorrection, and the second is state initiatives. And I think a part of this reality is an outgrowth of an overcorrection. There was a time in everyone's high school that we had what we now call in the research tracking. There was college prep, there was regular, and then there was vocational training. Now, there were racial dynamics and class dynamics laid on top of that. And so, in an attempt to disrupt those racial and class dynamics, we got rid of tracking, as they called it, which was really what we now would call career pathways.
Right.
And,
we just call it something different. We're still tracking.
Right. And as a result, students leaving high school don't enjoy the same thoughtfulness about career opportunities in welding, advanced automation, that would be ideal. I have an aunt who retired after 30-some years at the post office, and her pension and lifestyle is a lot better than mine as a college president. So, but those were because the guidance counselors were able to provide meaningful career pathways in those communities. And I think that overcorrection needs to be looked at. And the second is, and it's good to see former Secretary Heiner, in Louisiana, we took this up and realized that there was a state responsibility to re-incentivize career pathways. And so the state did a number of things at the legislative level. One, we promote dual career pathways for every possible area. So students are trained in knowledge about PTech, petroleum technology. So there are 2 pathways. There's the $68,000 pathway where you do either apprenticeship or an associate degree to work in Dow or any of the oil rigs. And then there's the engineering pathway. Same at each level. Nursing, we do not just nursing at the RN level, but we specialize in phlebotomy and all health records management. So students have that option. So that's incentivized by what we don't talk about enough anymore, dual enrollment, and making sure that students in the high school have access to highly rigorous post-secondary coursework, so they can have those courses before they finish. They also mandated FAFSA as a high school graduation requirement. And so you don't have to do anything but fill out the form.
Right.
But what that does, it allows colleges and community colleges, all colleges, to have access to sharing career information with students while they're still in high school.
And Dr. Thompson, dual credit enrollment is at its peak right now, right?
It is, and it's growing even more, but let me address some of these from a post-secondary viewpoint. I mean, we're talking about access, we're talking about affordability, we're talking about student success. What I know when I travel around the state of Kentucky, not everybody believes that they can go to college for a post-secondary credential. Now, what I will tell you is representing post-secondary, that's both the technical post-secondary certificates as well as those that are getting PhDs. Well, I know not everybody should go to college, but I believe everybody should have the chance to make that decision whether or not they want to go to college. And a part of the conversation that we're not having here is that not everybody believes that. So that's on us to talk about that. The other thing is the idea of affordability, whether or not they believe they can go or not. I love the Work Ready Scholarship, thank you, because it gives us another route to help students know that they have access to a workable, stackable credential. The other thing too, I would argue, is that it is a both and. It's not an either or. The idea that we should be, and the difference between what we're doing now and tracking, I think, is this big difference. We're getting student input from very, very early versus we're telling them where to go. And the idea that's also cultural competence, just let me throw it out there. But the idea that if we are aligning students or helping students to know what the options are, Dr. Brown, that's what you're saying, and I agree, what the options are in 7th grade, we see a measurable return on their investment. The other thing too, I don't have a problem with student debt necessarily. I have a problem is when they get the debt and they don't get the credential. Right. That's who doesn't pay back. That's the problem. Or they get the debt and they get a credential that they can't pay off the debt with. I mean, which is problematic. The idea that if we can work to talk about whatever monies they get through a Work Ready Scholarship, through other scholarships, through loans or Pell Grants or CAP Grants or KTG, to work that in the best way possible to get that credential, that's what we need to be talking about. But we need to make sure, though, that as long as we have these persistent gaps in completing, then we've got a problem. We do have 100,000+ middle school jobs that we have to get filled, but we also know that we have to prepare students to actually go in jobs that doesn't exist yet.
Right.
So the power of what we need to do here, there's plenty of work for all of us to do. So it should never be about either or. It should always be about a both and. And then how we design what we do, then it's on our backs that we need to be talking about how we make that happen.
We want to have some time for some audience questions. Hi, Jamaica. How are you? And I think you're going to go around with the mic and do that. And meanwhile, while you're finding folks who want to ask a question, what's missing at this stage is someone from early childhood, right? And I've heard each of you, I think, talk about the importance of early childhood education. I know, Commissioner, you have as well. Yes, so that's one partner that's missing. We heard Dr. Thompson talk about businesses always telling us what they want, but what can they do? What can business do for higher ed and for education also? So speak.
We want to be really clear that I'll tell you, as Commissioner of Education, I represent early childhood education as well.
Sure.
We are a P12 system. Our work begins with public preschool in Kentucky, and we are, over the last couple months, have done considerable work in taking a look at our public preschool program. In making sure that the initiatives that we're beginning in both early literacy and early numeracy do in fact begin with public preschool. We have work to
Universal preschool, do you support that as a state-funded mechanism?
Well, when you look at the literature on universal preschool, it's defined lots of different ways. Universal preschool is defined from everything from the state paying for every citizen who has a kid to attend preschool, all the way to something that's
what would you support?
What would I support?
What would you support?
Truthfully, what I support right now is what we have in place. And I'll tell you why. Kentucky, in terms of public preschool, and I'm not talking about childcare, in terms of public preschool, Kentucky actually has one of the most effective and far-reaching preschool programs in the country. What we do is we provide public preschool at no cost to kids who are age 3 and age 4 who have disabilities, and kids who are age 4 if you are at 160% of the federal poverty level or below. The challenge we have right now in Kentucky with public preschool is we don't get nearly as many kids into public preschool who already qualify for it. And so I'm not opposed to having conversations about expanding it, but here's my fear, and this is the reason why you will not hear me as one of the advocates out front that's saying let's raise the 160 to 200. To be clear, there is need between 160% of the federal poverty level and 200%. Right. These are not families who are wealthy by any stretch of the imagination. My fear is that if we increase that right now, that our attention will go to 160 to 200 and we will not do the work that we need to be doing on the ground to get those families below 160% of the federal poverty level into high quality early learning settings. Because if we can get low income kids into high quality early learning, the research shows the difference between their kindergarten readiness and those of their peers who stay home, they're not even in the same ballpark.
So what is the department doing to get those kids within the system? Is that part of your role?
We're having conversations with superintendents. That becomes a local district role in terms of recruiting kids, but a lot of the work that you've seen us do in terms of communication and advocacy across the state has been around getting the word out about the importance of early learning, public preschool. I was just in Louisville yesterday and having this conversation.
Anyone else care to comment about early childhood education?
Let me just add a couple of points on. I don't know what a perfect preschool system looks like yet, but I know it has to look different than what we've had before somewhat. So I think a part of this is really trying to figure out what it looks like and then make it happen. I have a 5-year-old grandson. They sent me a picture of him day before yesterday. He was doing coding. So it may look different than what we've done before. But what I know is that they have to be more powerful than what we have now. And it's not, I'm not going to give you the number. I'm not even going to give you a funding mechanism for that. What I do know is that we do not have a good system unless we have a powerful preschool system. Higher education cannot be powerful unless we focus on that. So the idea that whatever it is, I just don't want us to get bogged down purely with trying to offer definitions of that solution before we figure out what the solution is. But whatever it is, we have to do it soon.
Anyone else care to comment on that? Before I go back to Commissioner Lewis, and if you have a question, please raise your hand and she'll come with the microphone. Commissioner Lewis, you talked earlier on about increased funding in certain targeted areas for education. Can you now get more specific about that idea?
It's absolutely. I'm happy with some of the ways that we've seen the General Assembly invest over the last couple years. At the secondary and post-secondary level, we've seen scholarship programs that target specifically dual credit. We've seen scholarship programs that provide, what do we call it? I'm losing my words. Provide funding to support kids who are taking advanced placement coursework. This is all around the strategy of trying to blur the lines between high school and college, and recognizing that getting kids well prepared for college, for whatever comes in post-secondary education, has to start in high school. And those methods, AP, dual credit, dual enrollment, Cambridge, IB, those have been shown to be successful with getting kids prepared. Kids who participate in those experiences have been shown to have higher matriculation rates into post-secondary education after they graduate, and success rates once they get there. In addition to that, I think a commitment to funding, commitment to continued funding to support our SEEK formula, which is the basis of what we do. I believe funding to support induction for teachers is incredibly important. Now, I have to give this caveat. I think one of the blessings for me before coming into this position was having spent some time in state government, to be honest, outside of the Department of Education. So if I were to give you a laundry list of things that I think would be great for us to strategically invest in, it'd probably be a pretty long list. I do have the background and the understanding, however, to understand that the financial situation of our state is incredibly bleak. And I understand that if we are going to pull money from somewhere to put into education, that means it has to come from somewhere else. So transportation funding for our school districts is really important. Early childhood education, both kindergarten and preschool, is incredibly important. But a part of that is finding ways to generate revenue.
How many kids of color do we know participate in IB, AB, or dual credit courses? And are those numbers increasing?
Those numbers are increasing. I can't give you the numbers off the top of my head. We do see increases both in the kids of color who are participating. This is dual credit specifically.
Dual credit.
Kids of color and low-income kids. And the scholarship is an incredibly important part of that, because even if the fee for participation was just $50, that $50 presented a barrier that lots of low-income kids simply couldn't overcome.
Dr. Brown.
Renee, let me add a quick thing to that for Dr. Brown, just on the dual credit. We had like 35,000 students participate last year. Because of the scholarships, we did see a rise in low income and students of color. Still not to the proportion, but we did see a rise. I'm sorry, Dr. Brown.
I just wanted to add to my wish list. Certainly, there can be bleak economic times, but K-12 education and an investment in it is not something you can afford not to invest in. It just has to be a priority. Every area of the workforce, every doctor, every lawyer, every janitor, every pipe fitter, every electrician began life in someone's kindergarten or elementary school. And so that's the beginning of life in our democracy. And I would really like to see the state invest in a high-achieving teacher recruitment program that would target high schoolers at the 3.0 and above high ACT or SAT level. I know how people feel about standardized tests, but to recruit them into the teaching profession using a relatively revenue neutral model, which is the forgivable loan system. It would be, in fact, a state level version of Teach for America.
You agree with that proposition, Commissioner?
I mean, to that end, we've been working, and we'll be announcing in the next week or so kind of our revamping of what used to be the Minority Educator Recruitment and Retention Forgivable Loan Program. That program, you'll be hearing from us very soon, will be called the Kentucky Academy for Equity in Teaching. Whereas the MER program previously was specifically aimed at kids of color based on race and ethnicity. There are a host of other indicators now as well where we need to increase the diversity of our teacher workforce. So race and ethnicity, low income, English language learners, veteran status, kids with disabilities. There's tremendous work to be done on intentionally recruiting high achieving students, kids of color, kids from low income backgrounds into the teacher workforce. Because when we the thing we know about teachers is teachers tend to want and tend to work in communities where they come from or in communities that are similar to where they come from. So as we want to make sure that teachers are getting into those places where our kids need them most, we have to very intentionally recruit young people from those very communities and get them interested in the teaching profession.
EKU still doing the Call Me Mr. program, Dr. Powell and Dr. Thompson? Yes. And maybe you can talk about that in a moment if the mic makes it your way so that people can learn about that. Any other comment? Is there a question from the audience? Okay. Someone could make a way for a mic right down here. Let's see if we can just hear you project. Let's try that.
access to various dimensions that people with those that have everything they need have access to. One of those things that they have at the K through 12 level is access to the arts and access to global perspective. And global perspective meaning they can travel. They do studies abroad. And and students of color often do not have access to even thinking of getting outside of their neighborhood, let alone being global players in the global society. And so could you just address how that perhaps the continued inclusion of the arts as well as global perspective could be an alternative to where we've come to just being standardized test takers without the ability to have a change in paradigm of the classroom and the environment of the classroom as well as the classroom teacher?
Good question. Commissioner?
So I'm an arts kid. A lot of folks might not know that about me. I grew up in the arts. I'm a native of the city of New Orleans. I think the arts and music are in our water in New Orleans. In fact,
He plays a mean saxophone, right?
I used to. in fact, I would say the most formative leadership experience I've ever had was as drum major in high school of my marching band. Was that St. Aug? That was St. Aug. You know. But I'll say this. I think we often make the mistake of thinking that an accountability system that is intended to be basic, to be relatively narrow in terms of what it measures. Accountability at the state level is intended to be the baseline. It's accountability for systems, it's accountability for schools, it's intended to be the baseline. That means you can't put the whole kitchen sink in it. And as professionals, professionals in our education system, we have to recognize and embrace the fact that just because something is not tested or is not a part of high stakes accountability does not mean that it is not incredibly important and that it shouldn't be a part of what we're doing with our young people.
But some people would say things that are not measured are not valued. That would be the contention that some would make.
And I would completely disagree with that. Completely disagree. If you go to the other end of the spectrum, Renee, there's really no place where everybody's really, really happy about this. The other end of the spectrum is we test everything, we measure everything. Mm-hmm. And then if we do that, all we're doing is spending our time on assessment, collecting data, and KDE and school districts, making sure everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing. And then we don't have time to really work on some of these intractable challenges. The other reason I have no desire with implementing a rigid type of accountability system around the arts from the state level, from the department level, is most of the best ideas in the arts and otherwise that are going to impact kids' lives, those ideas are going to come from schools and districts and educators. So who are we? It'd be incredibly arrogant for the Department of Education to assume we know how you ought to do arts in your school in every one of these 173 school districts across Kentucky. Instead, I think it is much more appropriate in the arts and in lots of other areas to grant the flexibility that's necessary for districts to innovate, come up with those ways to impact their kids' lives in ways that I agree with the gentleman are incredibly important. But we should never, it's unfortunate if we ever get to the place where we think that if the state is not measuring it or assessing it, then we shouldn't be doing it. That's not the purpose of state accountability.
And let me pick up Dr. McCutcheon. I lost you there for a second. You sat down on me. The idea that you talk about cultural competence. Diversity is the foundation of a good cultural competence system, but it's only the start, right? I don't know if you've ever thought about higher education, why we have things in general education that cover so many areas. The sciences, the arts, the humanities, all of those. The reason why, because it is the foundation of learning. It's the foundation of problem solving. It's the foundation of being able to think critically. Art is crucial, and some of you know that I really will only talk unless I can back it up with research. I can show you the substantive knowledge that you get by participating in that and how your brain works to get you where you need to go. So the idea that we have to have a holistic system of education that covers all of these that will allow us to be a better participating member of society. It also helps us in all of our jobs, whether we are in a STEM-related job or whether we're in a liberal arts sort of job. The idea that all of this matters. I love jazz, but I can't play it, Dr. Lewis, but I love it. You know, the idea that it stimulates me beyond what I do in my work or in the area I was prepared to do. So what we have to understand, cultural competence then, is having the ability to understand a person wherever they're coming from, the way they learn, the way they look, the way they act, who they are, and doing it in such a way that we allow them to build off of that from a foundation to become all they need to be. So arts are crucial in higher education. That's why we still have the pre-college curriculum that is around foreign language still, because we know that the more global understanding you have, the better opportunity you have to act and work globally. So I appreciate the question.
Another question down front. Yes, sir.
Yes, ma'am. I had a really quick question. I'm not really one for student loan debt. I really despise it, although I can see how it can help individuals obtain a college education. Really, my question is, how do we inform students or educate students on how much debt they're getting into? I think a lot of times freshmen and sophomores, they'll obtain $10,000, $20,000 of debt and not really understand how that relates to after how they graduate or when they graduate. That's a lot of money, and a lot of people don't know just how much it is while they're in college.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question, and I think Dr. Brown may want to pick this up a little bit too, but the idea that what we know, yes, about good financial counseling, it's about good ability to understand exactly what you're borrowing the money for or the return on investment. But it's also clearly about us doing a better job in post-secondary education to talk to you about what is the net price, what is the real cost that you're going to have to pay to go here, and what are all the opportunities you have of doing it before you borrow anything, right? And the idea that now you just know the sticker price fairly often about what we charge in tuition. So you may even be thinking you're going to have borrow far more money. So you may be coming in with the mindset that you need to borrow money that you may not necessarily need to. We also are going to have to think holistically about your living, right? I mean, the idea of what you have to pay for to do, whether it's student housing or meal costs or whatever the case may be. So I think we have to do a better job, all of us, and I'll put it on post-secondary back a little bit here, that we haven't done nearly as good of a job laying this out for you in such a strategic, quote unquote, way that would let you know how much you really need to borrow and what will be the return on investment based on the field you're going into.
Yeah. I differ from the secretary on this one. I do believe student loan debt. I had a full ride at University of Kentucky. I was a Lyman T. Johnson fellow, and I left UK to go to Penn State, where I had to take out student loans for my PhD when I could have gone for free. And it was one of the faculty. We were going to lunch, and I really wanted to go to Penn State. It was the #1 higher ed program in the country. And one of the faculty said, and I was like, well, I'm not going to go because they didn't give me a full scholarship. I'll just stay at UK. And he said to me, and I've never forgotten it, he said, at what point do you pay the cost of your education? He said, why should someone pay for you to go to school? What do we get out of that? And I think that the challenge is, as Dr. Thompson said, responsible debt use. We have situations here, and Aaron, you know it. We'll have a student who could clear their balance, and they need an $812 loan to be fully cleared, and they'll rather sit out a semester because we've taught them that loan debt is bad. But that $812 that you pay now is going to be hundreds of thousands of dollars of of salary earnings over your lifetime. I just finished paying off my student loans this year, and I think
Not me.
And you're 61.
No, I'm not. No, I'm not 61. But let me say the value of my education
Right.
and the quality of my career for the student loan debt is inconsequential. The challenge is poor and uneducated families, how they use student loan debt and student priorities. I have never had a protest on any campus I've led from a student who can't get a refund in time to get their textbook for class. But if the refunds aren't done by the time of homecoming, we have a problem, right? And so students are taking out debt not for education, but for lifestyle choices. And so it's not debt, it's responsible use of debt.
You know, and if I could also,
Yes, Secretary Ramsey.
to your point as well, you know, and respectfully to both my colleagues here, when you're on these campuses and young people have the opportunity coming from a place where they have nothing, and they get an opportunity and they get access to these monies, they take advantage of it.
Yes, they do.
And while you were disciplined, President, but I've seen so many young people that would be getting a degree in, let's say, history or even education. And these young people will go out there and earn $30,000. And they will have borrowed in excess of $75,000 or more. And interesting enough, I read an article a few weeks ago, if a person borrows $30,000, on average it takes them 15 years to repay it, on average. So if you look at the national average, which is 37, but in particular at our HBCUs, I know at my last stop I was at Coppin State University, and these kids would always have the latest, greatest of everything.
Yes.
And I know where they came from, but I also know what they were getting their degrees in. And to see them have 75, 85,000 in some cases of debt, and go out and get a $30,000 job is criminal to me. You know, we have to help these young people be financially responsible. But again, it's a challenge simply because of where they're coming from.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Ferris has a question, I do believe, if you could pass the mic to her.
And while she's getting that, I don't disagree with the Secretary on that. We've got to do a better job of making sure that people know what good debt is versus bad debt.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you all so very much. It's been very enlightening and impactful. Speaking from a Regent's perspective, if you could choose one thing or area for local boards and higher ed governing boards to focus on to improve the academic and career success of our students, what would it be? I would like to hear from each of you.
Well, I'll take a shot at that because I have a double responsibility here. One being on stage as secretary and the other being a regent at the University of Kentucky. From where I sit, the issue right now on all of our college campuses is diversity. You know, I think here in Kentucky, in that regard, I think all of our institutions are falling short at that. Because if you look at what's interesting is that you look at TV, for example. 5 years ago, 7 years ago, you would not see a commercial where there's a mixed couple. And all of you remember back when they had this commercial regarding the Cheerios, right? And everybody went crazy about this thing. Well, I shouldn't say everybody, a lot of people went crazy about that thing. And so I just think it is so unfortunate when we have our institutions of higher ed that are not represented with a diverse faculty, with a diverse
Administration.
administration. I mean, these things to me, I mean, hell, I graduated 40 years ago. It's embarrassing to me the place where we still are today. It hadn't changed from when I was at the institution. I mean, it's embarrassing. And so, but I think more than anything, I'm sympathetic to let's just say a person from Eastern Kentucky who at no point during their stay at a university had any involvement with a African American person, with the African person, a Asian person, and then they leave here and go to work in your New York and Chicago's and San Francisco's. Now all of a sudden they have a person that looks like me telling them what to do. What a change. What a change. And so I just believe that until we understand that and the significance of that and how important that is, we're cheating our kids, from my perspective.
I'm not sure how I'm supposed to disagree with that, but so I'm not. Only thing I know is, but you're so much older than I am. It's you will get one of these when you leave, which lines out what I think we have to be focused on in higher education. But I will tell you this in addition to that. I think Secretary Ramsey is absolutely correct. We have to be preparing our students for a global society. And you need to measure as a regent, what are you doing or not doing on your campus to do that? If you don't have representation at all levels, and I understand, I know the story about how hard it is to get people like us with PhDs to get there, well, we have to focus on that. We did that at EKU several years ago when I was in charge of that, and we did it. The idea that we have to be focused. The second thing is that we have to do a better alignment with P12. I mean, we've got this dual credit that we provide. Why are we not taking advantage of that, of aligning that with the things that are really going on with our campus to recruit more to go into these highly needed areas, right? Also, we're going to have to diversify our curriculum even. And what I mean by that is there's no reason, well, thank you. Yeah, there's no reason for us not to look at if we're doing the same thing we did 20 years ago, we're way behind. We do the same thing we did 10 years ago, we're way behind. 5 years ago, we're way behind, right? So the idea, how do we do a better job of diversifying the curriculum to focus on what's going on now? There's no reason why our liberal arts programs can't have a coding micro-credential. There's all kinds of ways we can think about this. Thirdly, I think we have to get our employers really engaged on the front end. We've got to get them to buy into our product. I know we don't want to call students products, but the idea that if they can believe that we're preparing our students to serve their needs, why shouldn't we ask them for a commitment to hire our students up front, not just wait till the end? So the idea that I think regents and trustees are going to have to be really clear about doing a needs assessment of your campus to see if you're really preparing, if you will, students for not just the 21st century, but latter part of the 21st century. So to me, that's and we have to also think about quality, as I said earlier. How do we know we're producing a quality product? Well, we do that with the infrastructure the curriculum, the faculty, the staff, the way we do customer service, the way we are engaging people in all those particular areas.
If I could also comment, Dr. is exactly right. Some years ago when I first got started in Harriet, back in the mid-90s, one of the best meetings that I attended in my 4 years there at the University of Kentucky was when Chancellor Zinsser brought all of the businesses, or as many businesses that were interested around the state, to a meeting, to a summit, if you would. And what we talked about, this whole profound thing of what is it that you all need? Because what happens at our institution is that for 1,000 years, this is the way we've been doing it. And 1,000 years more, if society will allow us to. Well, today has changed. I think the smart money says that institutions bring the businesses to the campus and say, what do you need and how can we be a partner? That's how the 21st century and beyond is going to work, not the way it's worked in the past.
Commissioner?
Yes, ma'am. So thank you, Dr. Ferris, for the question. I think it's a great question. And my response focuses on schools of education. I know we have some of our partners here. Dean Sandage is here from University of Kentucky, who hired me in 2008. I say that all the time so that people can either love her or hate her for it. And I think Dean Larson I saw in the back as well from University of Louisville, who we have an incredible partnership and relationship with. I would implore governing boards of our post-secondary institutions to think differently about their schools of education. The economics of schools of education is just fundamentally different than the economics of law schools or business schools or medical schools. And I think particularly for land-grant institutions, and I'm a proud land-grant graduate, for land-grant institutions, I think the responsibility of serving the state is even greater. Even when that responsibility leads you to make decisions that financially don't make a whole lot of sense. So I would implore governing boards, particularly at our land grants across the Commonwealth, to invest in schools of education. The work of recruiting incredible young people into the teaching profession, I believe, lies at the feet of our schools of education. For far too long, we've had a model in post-secondary education where we have essentially been lucky enough to just take whoever comes to post-secondary education wanting to become a teacher. Well, that's not gonna work anymore. We're gonna have to very intentionally recruit highly motivated, highly talented young people, oftentimes on our campuses. There's not a campus in the Commonwealth of Kentucky where there are not literally thousands of young people who are walking around, have no idea really what they want to do with their professional careers. There's no reason that schools of education should not be going to those young people and saying, have you ever considered a career in teaching? We have to invest in the programs to make sure that the folks that are coming out of our programs are prepared to meet these incredible challenges that we've been describing today. And then as our teachers need ongoing professional development and ongoing professional learning, our schools of education have to be front and center in that work as well.
Dr. Brown, if you care to comment.
And I was running out to find it. They're not here yet, but they'll be here in a moment. I spent the weekend, in fact, after seeing your email, Aaron, working on a leave behind as well that answers that question. It really coincides with what was said, so they'll be available outside. But I think one of the easiest answers from my vantage for both local boards and higher ed boards would be career focus, making sure that students at the K-12 level or P-12 have an understanding of the wide range of work and lifestyle opportunities that exist to them, and that college and university curricula at the higher ed level are focused on majors where people can find work and gainful employment, where there's not a whole year-long retooling. If you're providing accountants to the workforce, but every accounting agency has to retrain your graduate for a year, then post-secondary is sort of dropping the ball. And so I think if there's a career focus, and that can be manifested in a number of ways at both K-12 and at higher ed, I think we'd have made progress.
So as we wrap up, one more question, real quick question. Last question, please.
Good morning. My question really is about a workforce development issue and a teacher preparation issue in dealing with the out-of-school time that children, especially in low-income communities and minorities, experience, because most of the time is, in fact, out of school. So how do we professionalize and prepare out-of-school time workers and preschool teachers so that they have the education and then at the same time are able to earn the money so that they can stay in the field to enhance the P-12 and the post-secondary education environment for students to impact success for the whole child so that they can embrace an environment, I think someone said an environment of lifelong learning.
I'll comment specifically on the P-12 system, part of that. You mentioned preschool. One of the things that we do in Kentucky that I think was really forward-thinking, I can't tell you when the decision was made, but I think it's paid huge dividends with our public preschool program, is our public preschool teachers in Kentucky make the same wage as our public school teachers do in our K-12 system. Now, I do. I understand. But let me continue. That I think we've been doing in Kentucky for so long that we take it for granted. When you have conversations with folks outside of Kentucky, you recognize what an important step that was. And I believe paying our public preschool teachers in the same way that we pay our K-12 teachers has been central to us being able to build the type of effective public preschool program that we have. So I say that to give credence to the point that you're making, that it is important that we support through salary, through professional development, folks who are working with our youngest learners. I won't comment specifically on the out-of-school aspect of that in terms of training and development, just because, frankly, that's not an area where I have a whole lot of expertise or where I am. But in terms of the preschool, the early learning side of that, I think you're absolutely right. It's a conversation absolutely worth having.
If we could, as we wrap up, I'll ask each of you to give about a minute summation, a takeaway point that you want the audience to take away. And we'll start with you, Dr. Thompson.
Well, the takeaway I would want is for you to look on stage. All of us have dedicated ourselves to not just talk about working together, but to working together. We're designing strategic ways of making it happen. Yes, Dr. Brown and I are closely tied in what we're doing in higher education, but we've connected very closely in very similar ways with our workforce cabinet as well as with our P12. We look at this as an opportunity to do something. Now, will you be able to see all the measurable effects overnight? That's just not the way these things work. But what I would hope you would see is three things. One is that we're doing more than just talking. We're actually putting in place a strategic way of thinking about not just solving the needs of Kentucky, but in preparing Kentucky to solve the needs of others, including around the world. Number two, I would argue that we have a dedication in this room, all of us who are taking part in this conversation, to figure out how to reach out and become a part of this strategic effort. And number three, and I think it's important for all of us to understand too, that Kentucky education is the solution. And we've got to figure out how to put our acts together in order to support the solution. I understand all the other things that take away from us in this state, the pension, the Medicaid, all of those things. But after a while, it looks like we're funding just the problems and not the solution to those problems. So my argument is that we have to come together with the knowledge that we're going to have to figure out how to not just do the strategic effort, but to fund those strategic efforts that's focused on us being the solution.
Secretary Ramsey.
Yes. Okay. I was kind of surprised at a question that didn't come up today, which is the 1,000-pound gorilla in every room throughout the Commonwealth of Kentucky, and that is the drug epidemic. It is real, it is live, and no end in sight. And so we have to understand that those numbers that I gave you earlier, that being 117,000 open jobs today, 350,000 in the next 5 years, and 750,000 in the next 10 years. If we do not get our arms around this, we are in trouble. This is not only a Kentucky issue, a Commonwealth issue, but it is a national issue. And yes, while the numbers look somewhat favorable regarding heroin, the numbers have started to decrease between 17 and 18, first half of both years. But something that we all should look at. This is something that everyone in this room is being affected by somebody, be it a family member or someone that you know, or someone that your family knows. And the second piece I talked about earlier, the incarceration piece. It's so interesting now, and I got a chance to testify on one of the committees that I'm on, and it was a packed audience there. And so interesting. Time has a way of playing with all of us and our minds in the way that we think. And I posed a question to that audience 5 years ago, 10 years ago. No one would admit that they certainly had a family member that was incarcerated, and probably not even say that they knew someone that had been incarcerated. Well, the reality of it is that we all do. And from where I sit as Secretary of Workforce, I too believe that they have served their time, so they deserve a second chance. I believe that. And so to fill these jobs that we have, it's going to take everyone. Those that have been incarcerated, those that are just now acquiring a GED, those that have disabilities, all of those, our veterans, it's going to take all of us and all of those. So I want to encourage you to think about, as we move forward into this 21st century, all those sisters and brothers that deserve that second chance. We are a second chance state.
Commissioner?
Yes, ma'am. Again, I'm really thankful for this opportunity. I think one of the things that is important to highlight that everybody might not understand is the formal mechanism through which our work is connected.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of this is actually through statute and regulation. So the Department of Education, by structure, is administratively attached to the Cabinet for Education and Workforce Development. By statute, I serve as an ex officio member on Dr. Thompson's board, on the Council for Post-Secondary Education. By statute, he serves as an ex officio member on my board, the Kentucky Board of Education. Dr. Brown and I are in constant communication about ways that we can continue to expand our partnerships together. But then in addition to those structural, those statutory required relationships, the thing that I want everybody in this room to understand, and the opportunity that I want them to understand, is that none of us are ever more than a text message away from each other.
Mm-hmm.
And we are in constant communication. And in addition to us working together and being required to work together, we actually all really like each other. The relationships that we have, the personal relationships we have, the professional relationships we have, I believe give us the opportunity to move forward on this agenda of closing gaps, of increasing achievement, of getting more Kentuckians into gainful employment. These relationships give us the opportunity, I believe, to move like never before. And it is absolutely essential, even in this intense political time that we find ourselves in at the state level and at the national level, that we find ways to seize this opportunity at hand to move forward for the sake of our kids and for the sake of our Commonwealth.
President Brown.
Well, again, thank you. I want to pick up where Wayne left off, but put one critique in. I can always get Wayne for lunch or Aaron for refreshment afterwards. But Ramsey's only time, he likes to meet me at 6 a.m. early in the morning. I'm not a morning person, but I get up.
Yeah, you do.
I get up. So no, we do work well together, and I'm excited that we had this opportunity to host this conversation. I think it's an important restatement also of Kentucky State's work as the university in the capital city, of making sure that there's opportunity for the Commonwealth to convene and to address its issues and to bring stakeholders and partners together to do that work. And my staff is hiding from me. Do you have something for me, Claire? Yeah, they're coming. That's why I ran off. I couldn't see. They've got me at a disadvantage with no cell phone. Anybody knows I'm a texter. So I wanted to give gifts to and to Renee. Do it for me so I don't have to get up. Thank you.
Oops.
To our panelists,
Give
thank
him the
you.
broken one.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And
Thank
they're
you,
going to
Dr.
pass out the leave behind now, so you'll get those now.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr.
Always.
Brown.
Can we give
Give
a-
them all a round of applause, please.
Hey, Renee.
Yes,
I'll
Secretary.
just make one more quick comment.
Yes, Secretary
I
Ramsey,
knew
real quickly.
that President Thompson said he was welcome back home. Well, sir, I'm glad
That's
to be
right.
back home as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I had my first big opportunity as athletic director of this incredible institution that I am eternally grateful for. So it's always good for me to come back home.
Yeah.
And can I say one thing, so I can have a job at March quarterly board meeting? I'd certainly like to thank all of my regents who I see. Just saw you. Thank you.
Very well. Thank you all, and thank you for allowing me to moderate this very informative discussion. I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Roger Cleveland, Director of the Center for Research on the Eradication of Educational Disparities, and he'll bring our closing remarks.
Good morning. We can do a little better than that. Good morning.
Good morning.
Before I go into my closing remarks, let's give our panelists another hand. And we definitely cannot forget our skillful and outstanding moderator, Ms. Renee Shaw.
Oh, yeah.
Now, since we had this conversation over the last hour and 30 minutes or so, and we've been talking about students, I want to recognize our scholars from Carter Jefferson Academy, our Fayette County Public Schools. Scholars, please stand. Thank you. Good to see you. Now, these same young men is sitting out there will be sitting up here soon.
That's right.
Okay? That's what we're talking about, right? So this has been a great conversation. And so let me talk about a little bit what I've heard from our panelists and some of the questions out there. I heard that we need to create an equitable education system. That's critical. I heard that we need to create a sense of urgency about education and the workforce in the Commonwealth. We have to be intentional. Intentionality is critical. What you magnify will manifest. And so we have to be intentional about what we're doing and what are we doing to our students. We must be willing to collaborate and partner with other entities to create a first-class public education system and a robust workforce in the Commonwealth, Secretary. Our theme today is Together We Can, and this is critical because it will require everyone in this room and many more outside this room to get this work done. Dr. Thompson, there's an African proverb that says, I am because we are, and because we are, therefore I am. Okay? This work will require everyone a collective effort to get this work done. If we do not get education right in this state, it will impact everyone in this room and everyone in the state. And it will impact all of us, either directly or indirectly. There's no such thing as my side of the boat is sinking. If I go down, we all go down. Okay? Right. So it has to take a collective effort to get this work done. So, Provost Yates, when I listened to these great minds on stage and some of the things they had to say, I had an epiphany, and these words came to my mind. We can, whenever and wherever we choose, successfully teach all children whose schooling is of interest to us. We already know more than we need to do that. Whether or not we do it must finally depend on how we feel about the fact that we haven't so far. And what these words are saying is about will and skill. And we know we had the skill, all right? So it's an issue of will for everyone in this Commonwealth to make this happen. These words are from Dr. Ron Edmonds, the father of the Effective Schools movement. He quoted these insightful words in the Journal of Educational Leadership in 1979 in Brooklyn, New York. 1979, let that sink in, all right? 40 years later, we're on the Hill at Kentucky State University having the same conversation. Even though we have not gotten where we want to be, I have faith in our educational leaders that we will get there. Dr. Lewis, I was sitting in the pews of a church yesterday morning, and my pastor, C.B. Akins, said, and I quote, "Failure is not fatal and it's not final." So even though we haven't gotten where we want to be, we're a lot better than where we used to be, right? So we keep pushing for that. One last thing that we have to also think about when we do this work together. We're going to continue this. This is just a conversation. It hasn't started to work yet. We continue this conversation. We got to practice the ministry of presence. So anywhere this conversation is going on about educating our children, we practice the ministry of presence. And what that means, you show up, but when you show up, you show out. You bring your A game. So we got to practice the ministry of presence. And I would be remiss not to state this, and Ms. Shaw mentioned this a little bit. If I did not recognize the historical moment we have here at Kentucky State University on this day, January 14th, 2019, next week we will celebrate the dream of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. all over this country. And on this day, we have an African-American male leader of our K-12 system. We have an African-American male who is the educational czar of higher education. We have the Secretary of Education and Workforce Development, an African-American male. And finally, we have the only African-American male president of one of our four-year public institutions. I'll challenge you to find that anywhere else in the United States. That needs an applause. We are making history in this country. We're making history in this country. And so we're celebrating Dr. King's dream next week. This is a reality. This is a reality. Dr. Brown had the vision to create the Atwood Center and the Creed Center to address the historical and temporary issues in education. Dr. Derrick and I are committed to this work and to this university and to this Commonwealth.